Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a really captivating period this time, 1450 to 1750.
Big changes.
Huge. We've got our trusty textbooks and some helpful diagrams, kind of like our maps and stuff.
Oh, visuals, excellent.
Yeah, so we can really, see how one corner of the world, what happens there, can impact everything else.
Yeah, it's all connected.
It is. And we'll see how this era really shaped, well, everything, the world we live in right now.
Pretty amazing when you think about it, how a chance meeting or a new idea could just completely change the course of history.
Yeah, a chain reaction almost.
Exactly.
So Europe, let's start there. Their position on the Atlantic, right?
The Atlantic Rim.
The rim, that's the word, easy to forget, but that geography really put them in the driver's seat for all these big voyages, huh?
Oh, absolutely. Compared to, like, an empire stuck in the middle of a continent.
Right, landlocked.
Landlocked, yeah. Having that open door to the Atlantic, that was huge for Europe. But it wasn't the whole story.
Right, there had to be reasons. Like, why even go, right?
Exactly. Europe was, relatively speaking, pretty poor back then. They wanted more, resources.
So the Americas were looking pretty good, huh?
Full of potential, yeah.
But it wasn't just grabbing stuff, right? They also wanted to spread their religion.
That's right, Christianity, and specifically, our sources point to Spain, really pushing Catholicism.
Spain was a big player, for sure.
Huge. That religious drive, combined with, wanting those economic resources, that really shaped how they dealt with the New World as they saw it.
It's interesting, though, thinking back, how did Europe even get to that point where they could do all this sailing and exploring?
Well, that's where the Renaissance comes in.
The Renaissance.
That's right. This is all about, rediscovering ancient knowledge, pushing boundaries. It was a real shift in thinking.
So that's where the improvements in maps and ships came from.
Exactly. Suddenly they had the tools and the knowledge to navigate uncharted waters.
Like a whole new world opening up.
Exactly. And you have figures like King Henry of Portugal, really pushing for exploration, investing in shipbuilding, schools for navigation, better maps, the whole package.
So he's the one who kind of kicked things off.
He was a driving force, for sure. And then you have the explorers themselves, Vasco da Gama, finding that sea route to India, Bartholomew Diaz rounding the tip of Africa.
Wow, so those voyages really opened up new possibilities, new trade routes.
Oh, absolutely. New trade routes and then some. And then, of course, you can't forget Christopher Columbus.
Oh, yeah, Columbus aiming for Asia, but ending up in the Americas.
It's funny how a wrong turn can change the world, huh?
Talk about a happy accident for Europe, right?
But then that brings us to the Treaty of Tordesillas, kind of dividing up the New World between Spain and Portugal.
Trying to, at least. This map really shows it.
It does, but how did they even think they could enforce something like that? All that vast territory. It was more of a symbolic gesture than anything else, really. It showed how ambitious Europe was, wanting to carve up the world. But it didn't really take into account the people already living in these so-called new lands.
Or the fact that it was so unexplored.
Right. Exactly. And as you can imagine, this led to conflicts.
Oh, yeah. Spain and Portugal always vying for more, right?
Always. So you have Europe, full of ambition, arriving in the Americas, feeling pretty entitled.
And not just arriving, right? They brought something else with them. Diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza. Our sources really highlight how devastating that was for the native people.
It's a tragic but really crucial point. These diseases, the Europeans had built up some immunity to them. That the indigenous people, they had never encountered anything like it.
Yeah, their immune systems had no defense.
None. It was catastrophic.
Yeah.
Entire populations wiped out in a single generation. It's really hard to grasp the scale of it.
It really is. This image showing the population changes, it's just heartbreaking. And it wasn't just disease, right? The Spanish conquistadors, they had technology that must have seemed almost supernatural to the native people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Armor, steel swords, horses.
It's no wonder they were terrified.
It must have been unbelievable to them. And that advantage, it didn't just appear out of thin air. This was centuries of development, especially in Eurasia. Metallurgy, trade networks, all of that.
So the interconnectedness of Eurasia gave them a leg up, so to speak.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how what happens in one place can have huge consequences somewhere else. Take the fall of the Inca and Aztec empires, for instance. People often say it was just the Spanish conquistadors' military might.
But the disease had already weakened them, hadn't it?
Exactly. It's a reminder that history is complicated, more than just a simple story.
Definitely. And amidst all that conquest and tragedy, something else was happening, right? The Columbian Exchange.
Ah, yes. That exchange of plants, animals, everything between the old world and the new. This image with the plants really shows how significant it was.
It really does.
It's hard to imagine Europe without potatoes, tomatoes, corn now.
And we're staples.
They are. And in the Americas, the arrival of wheat, sugar, that had a huge impact too. But sadly, that demand for sugar, well, that led to something truly horrific. The Atlantic slave trade.
That's right. And it's so important to understand this wasn't like any kind of slavery that existed before. This was chattel slavery.
People treated as property.
Exactly. No rights whatsoever. And this whole idea of chattel slavery, it went hand in hand with the rise of racism, the idea that Africans were somehow inferior and therefore deserved to be enslaved.
It's a truly dark chapter in human history.
It is. And it's crucial to understand this history because it still shapes our world today, the racial dynamics, the inequalities.
It's a legacy we're still grappling with.
Absolutely. And the scale of the trade, the different powers involved, it's chilling. The Ottoman Empire, even they played a role, right? Capturing and selling slaves to Europe. And the conditions during the Middle Passage, a 15% mortality rate.
Horrific.
It was a brutal, profit-driven system. The use of guns in exchange for human beings just added fuel to the fire.
It intensified the cycle of violence and capture.
It was about power, about control.
You're right. The Atlantic slave trade wasn't just a side effect of European expansion. It was a deliberate system calculated to extract wealth and resources from Africa and the Americas.
And the consequences are still felt today.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder of the dark side of globalization, how power and exploitation can be so intertwined.
It's a difficult topic, but one we can't ignore.
We can't if we want to truly understand this era.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about another group of empires that were powerful during this time. The gunpowder empires.
The Ottomans, Mughals, and Safavids.
Exactly. They rose to power using, well, gunpowder.
Gunpowder technology, yes.
Yeah.
And their ability to project that military might.
Each one had its own story, but they shared that common thread of military dominance.
What's fascinating is how they interacted with this changing global landscape. They weren't isolated. They were engaging with each other, with Europe, with other powers in Asia.
So they were part of this larger story of trade, conquest, the struggle for dominance in a world that was changing so rapidly.
Right, and they all eventually faced challenges from within and from outside.
Right.
Take the Ottomans, for example. They were a major power in the Mediterranean.
A force to be reckoned with.
They were. But internal conflicts, economic problems, the rise of European powers, all of that contributed to their gradual decline.
It was almost like a classic rise and fall story, right?
It is. It shows how even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to change, to those forces that are always at play.
So we see this pattern of empires rising and falling, but what about the powers that chose a different path? Let's talk about China and Japan. They decided to close themselves off to the rest of the world.
A very different approach.
Right. It's like they saw what was happening elsewhere, all the conflict and change, and decided to protect themselves by turning inward.
It was a deliberate attempt to control their own destinies, to limit outside influence.
But was isolation truly possible in a world that was becoming increasingly interconnected?
That's the question we'll explore as we delve into the stories of China and Japan. They may have closed their doors, but the world outside kept changing. And those changes would eventually find their way in.
Okay, so we've talked about empires and conquests and trade and, some pretty dark stuff, too, with the slave trade.
That's heavy stuff.
It is. But let's shift gears a bit now. Let's talk about, well, revolutions, but not the kind with armies and battles. Revolutions in thought, ideas, specifically the Protestant Reformation and the Scientific Revolution. These two movements, they really shook things up in Europe, and those tremors, they were felt all over the world.
It's fascinating, isn't it? During this time of global change, the way people thought about, well, everything, religion, authority, the natural world, it was all being challenged.
Yeah, like people were starting to see things in a new light.
Exactly. And these shifts in thinking, they had huge consequences, not just for Europe, but for everyone, everywhere.
So the Protestant Reformation, that's got to be a good starting point.
Right,
Yeah.
It's a big one. And it wasn't just about religious disagreements, oh no. This was deeply tied to all sorts of tensions that were brewing in Europe at the time. Social tensions, political tensions, you name it.
There was a lot of unrest.
A lot. People were becoming increasingly disillusioned with the Catholic Church. They saw it as corrupt, too focused on wealth and power.
They felt like the church had strayed from its spiritual mission.
Exactly. And the sale of indulgences, that was a big one. This idea that you could essentially buy forgiveness for your sins, it really outraged a lot of people.
It seemed like a blatant abuse of power.
It did. And then you have Martin Luther, this German monk who steps onto the scene.
Bold move, taking on the church.
Oh, he was fearless. He writes his 95 Theses, laying out his arguments against indulgences and other church practices. And then, thanks to the printing press...
Ah, the printing press. Game changer.
Totally. Suddenly, information could be spread far and wide, much faster and easier than ever before. The church couldn't control the flow of ideas anymore.
So Luther's ideas, they just took off.
Like wildfire. They resonated with so many people who were already feeling disillusioned with the church, and boom, you've got a religious and political firestorm.
It really shook things up. So then we see the emergence of Protestant states, like in Germany and Scandinavia. And then, of course, there's Henry VIII of England. He splits from the church because he wants an annulment, but the Pope says no.
It's almost comical, right? A personal issue with huge political ramifications.
Talk about a chain reaction.
Right. Henry's motives, they were more about, well, let's say, matters of the heart than religious conviction. But his actions, they set off a chain of events that led to the establishment of the Church of England. And that created all sorts of conflicts, religious and political.
It's like a whole new chapter in English history.
It is. The image of Henry VIII, with all 6 of his wives, it really captures the drama of this period, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a story for the ages, but it just goes to show how intertwined religion and politics were back then.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to the scientific revolution. Another huge shift in thinking, but this one was all about challenging what people thought they knew about the natural world. It's like humanity was starting to question everything.
It's like they were finally seeing the world with fresh eyes.
Yeah, and this wasn't happening in a vacuum, right?
No, not at all. The scientific revolution was influenced by so many things. The Renaissance, for one, with its emphasis on reason and observation, the rediscovery of classical texts, the invention of the printing press, the age of exploration, all of these things were contributing to this new way of thinking.
So people were being exposed to new ideas, new information, new ways of seeing the world.
Exactly. And they were starting to realize that they didn't have to just accept what traditional authorities told them. They could seek knowledge for themselves through observation and experimentation.
It was a real shift in power, in a way.
It was. And then you have figures like Nicholas Copernicus coming along, challenging the geocentric view of the universe, the idea that the Earth was the center of it all.
That must have been a radical idea at the time.
Oh, it was. It went against everything people had believed for centuries. Copernicus proposed instead a heliocentric model with the sun at the center. It was revolutionary.
And controversial.
Absolutely. It challenged not just scientific understanding, but religious doctrine too.
Right. The church wasn't too happy about that.
Not at all. But then you have Galileo Galilei, using the newly invented telescope to observe the heavens and gather evidence to support Copernicus's theory.
So he was actually able to see it, to prove it?
He was. His observations of the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, they provided compelling evidence that the Earth was not the center of the universe.
Those observations must have blown people's minds.
I can only imagine. And it didn't stop there. Johannes Kepler, he figures out the laws of planetary motion, showing that planets move in elliptical orbits, not perfect circles as previously believed. And then there's Isaac Newton, the giant of the scientific revolution.
Newton, yeah, his laws of motion, gravity, the whole shebang.
He put it all together. He synthesized the discoveries of his predecessors and developed a comprehensive theory of gravity that explained everything from why apples fall from trees to how planets move in the heavens. It was groundbreaking.
It's amazing to think about how all of these discoveries rippled outward, impacting not just science, but how people thought about knowledge and authority.
It was a huge shift.
And it wasn't always easy, right? I mean, Galileo, he was put on trial by the Inquisition for supporting heliocentrism.
He was. The scientific revolution challenged long-held beliefs and traditions, and those in power, they often resisted. But despite the challenges, the scientific revolution had a profound and lasting impact.
It changed the way people saw the world, their place in it.
Exactly. It was like humanity was coming of age, realizing that it had the power to understand and shape the world through reason and observation. It's a powerful idea, and it's one that would continue to influence people for centuries to come.
But these revolutions in thought, they weren't limited to Europe, right?
No way.
Yeah.
These ideas, they spread throughout the world. The Renaissance, the Reformation, the scientific revolution, they influenced intellectual and cultural movements everywhere. Asia, Africa, the Americas, no one was immune.
So even as some powers were trying to isolate themselves, these ideas were seeping in.
Exactly. It just goes to show you, you can't truly separate yourself from the world. Ideas, they have a way of finding their way in no matter what. The printing press, it was a key player in this, helping to spread knowledge across continents and connect people in ways that it had never been possible before.
So even in a time of supposed isolation, the world was becoming increasingly interconnected.
Absolutely. But how did the other powers, we've talked about the gunpowder empires, China, Japan, Russia,
Yeah.
how did they respond to all of this change? Did they embrace these new ideas or did they try to resist them?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's what we'll explore as we continue our deep dive. We'll see how these powers navigated this era of global transformation, the choices they made, and the consequences of those choices. We've seen how Europe went from, well, wanting more resources to really changing the Americas forever. It's crazy how that happened.
And the impact, it really rippled outward, changing the whole global scene.
Exactly. It's like Europe's on the rise, but they weren't the only ones making moves.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
We've talked about those gunpowder empires, the Ottomans, the Mughals, the Safavids, and how they were in decline. That shift, it created openings for other powers.
Not just Europe, though.
Right. It's like a power vacuum opens up and everyone's trying to figure out how to fill it.
In Europe, they were in a prime position, right? They had the wealth from the Americas, the military technology.
They did. And they weren't shy about using it. Look at what happened in the Philippines.
Like Philippines.
Yeah. Spain conquers the Philippines. But it wasn't just about setting up a trading post or two. This was about taking control, establishing their dominance in Asia. It was a region that had been under the influence of the Ming Dynasty. But remember, the Ming, they were on their way out.
It's almost like Spain saw an opportunity and grabbed it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And their approach in the Philippines, it was different from what they did in the Americas.
How so?
Well, in the Americas, it was a lot more about brute force, conquering those powerful empires, the Aztecs, the Incas. But in the Philippines, they faced less organized resistance. So they focused more on setting up an administration, collecting taxes, converting people to Catholicism.
And more of a subtle approach.
In a way, yes. But of course, that doesn't mean Spanish rule was all sunshine and roses, not by a long shot. There was still exploitation, still oppression.
Just the different flavor of colonialism, I guess.
You could say that. It highlights how complex these colonial encounters were, how European powers had to adapt their strategies depending on where they were, who they were dealing with.
So it's not as simple as just saying Europe conquered the world.
Not at all. History is full of these nuances, these complexities that challenge our assumptions. It's not black and white.
Definitely not. And speaking of challenges, Europe's rise, it wasn't without its bumps in the road, all that silver coming in from the Americas. It wasn't all good, right?
You're thinking about inflation.
Yeah. Didn't that cause some problems?
Big problem. All that silver flooding into the European economy, it led to inflation. The value of their currency went down. Things became unstable.
Classic boom and bust.
Exactly. It's a lesson in unintended consequences. You disrupt the system, things were going to happen, and not always good things.
And that silver, it also highlights how interconnected the world was becoming, right? Even China. They were trying to stay isolated, but they couldn't escape those global economic forces.
You're right. They needed that silver. It played a huge role in their economy. It just goes to show no nation could truly isolate itself during this time.
The world was shrinking, even if some people didn't want it to.
Exactly. Goods, ideas, people, they were all flowing across borders, whether governments liked it or not.
So it wasn't just about Europe. It was about this complex web of connections, everyone impacting everyone else.
A global network taking shape.
And amidst all this change, Russia's also making its move, right? Expanding across Asia, pushing west.
They were driven by that desire for furs, soft gold as they called it, and those security concerns in the West. Remember, they had those rivals, those threats they had to deal with.
They were surrounded, weren't they?
They were. And they had their own internal divisions too, different groups vying for power. It's remarkable how they managed to overcome all of that and become a major player on the world stage.
And gunpowder, that played a key role, right?
Absolutely. Gunpowder weapons helped them conquer new territories, solidify their control, and then you have these strong leaders like Ivan the Great who finally broke free from the Mongols.
Asserting Russian independence.
Exactly. And then Ivan the Terrible, despite his reputation, he expanded Russian territory, centralized power.
And then there's Peter the Great, the modernizer.
Peter, he's fascinating. He knew Russia had to change, had to catch up with the West if they wanted to compete. So he modernizes the military, builds St. Petersburg as this grand new capital, tries to westernize Russian culture, everything from clothing styles to education.
It was a radical transformation.
It was. And not everyone was happy about it, of course. But You can't deny the impact Peter had. He turned Russia into a force to be reckoned with in European politics. And his reforms, they laid the foundation for Russia's continued expansion, for its influence in the centuries to come.
So much change, so much upheaval. It's been quite a journey, this deep dive into 1450 to 1750.
It has. We've seen empires crumble, new powers rise, ideas and technologies spreading like wildfire, changing everything.
It's mind-boggling to think about how all of this, from Columbus setting sail to Martin Luther nailing his theses to the door, how it all led to the world we live in today.
It's all connected. One thing leads to another, and before you know it, the world is a completely different place.
It makes you wonder, what seeds of change are we planting right now that will shape the future? What will historians a few centuries from now be saying about our time?
That's the beauty of history, isn't it? It's not just about the past, it's about understanding the present and pondering the future. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning, because the story of humanity, well, it's still being written.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This time you guys have really outdone yourselves with this reading list, Revolutions and Empires, huh? It's kind of wild to think that just like ideas from the Enlightenment actually led to events that, changed the world forever.
It is amazing how those ideas become action, right?
Yeah.
And the Enlightenment, well, it was a time of some really radical ideas, especially from guys like John Locke.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he wasn't just talking about natural rights. Like, in theory, he was laying the groundwork, I think, for revolutions that hadn't even happened yet.
Yeah, that social contract idea is huge, right?
Absolutely.
Like, governments get their power from the people, and if they break that contract, boom, revolution.
Exactly. And you can see his influence, I mean, directly in things like the U.S. Declaration of Independence. Locke's thought helped justify the fight against, oppressive rule. And even today, his ideas about individual liberty and limited government are still relevant.
Yeah, for sure. So Locke provides this framework for like rebelling against tyranny, and his work was, revolutionary, but it mostly focused on men. But in our stack of sources, we also have Mary Wollstonecraft. Now, she was fighting for equality at a time when that was like a totally radical concept.
Oh, yeah. Well, Wollstonecraft was incredible. She was just like so passionate about women's rights, demanded equal access to education, to opportunities. It's like unheard of for women at that time. I think she laid the groundwork for so many feminist movements to come, for sure.
Totally. And it's amazing how these Enlightenment ideas traveled across the Atlantic, especially to the American colonies. We always hear about the American Revolution, but like, what was it actually like in America before the Revolution?
Well, think of it this way. Compared to like the rigid social structures in Europe, the American colonies were almost like a different world.
Okay.
The sources you sent really paint a picture of life there. There was, more social mobility, more opportunities to own land, greater political participation, a bigger mix of religions. I mean, it wasn't like perfect or anything,
right?
But, the seeds of self-government were definitely there.
Okay, and then Britain comes in and starts imposing all these new taxes and regulations, the Stamp Act, the Quartering Act.
Right.
And of course, who can forget that whole Tea Party in Boston Harbor?
Yeah, the Boston Tea Party, it's almost symbolic now, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it really captures the growing frustration with British rule. It's a great example of how these little acts of defiance can snowball into huge, huge changes.
And then in comes Thomas Paine with Common Sense. I'm always so struck by how a simple pamphlet could have such a huge impact, completely sway public opinion toward independence.
Yeah, Paine was really something. He took these complex Enlightenment ideas, put them in plain language so everybody could understand. He connected the dots, basically, showed how Locke's ideas about tyranny applied directly to what they were going through. Common sense was enlightenment for the masses, I guess you could say.
Right, right. So we see the American Revolution unfold, fueled by these ideas brewing back in Europe. But how does the French Revolution fit into all of this? Was it just a coincidence that these two revolutions happened at basically the same time?
It's definitely more than coincidence.
Okay.
But both revolutions were driven by this, desire for freedom and self-determination. But they played out very differently.
Yeah.
While the American Revolution was about breaking away from a distant power, the French Revolution was a struggle within France itself, this simmering class tension that finally boiled over.
Okay, and that tension, that comes from the infamous French social structure, right?
Yes.
The three estates, where a tiny, tiny elite held all the wealth and power.
Exactly. And to really grasp like how unequal it was, just look at this pie chart from your sources. It shows so clearly how the first and second estates, the clergy and the nobility owned almost all the land but paid hardly any taxes.
Wow.
And then you got the third estate, right?
Hmm.
The vast majority of the people, the peasants, artisans, merchants, intellectuals, they paid most of the taxes but faced poverty, food shortages. I mean, talk about a recipe for revolution.
Yeah, for real. So economic crisis plus these Enlightenment ideas about equality and the rights of citizens.
Right.
That created a very explosive situation in France. And when it exploded, the effects, well, they were felt everywhere.
Everywhere.
So the French Revolution kicks off, and then there's this period of massive upheaval. And from all that chaos, a new leader emerges, Napoleon Bonaparte. It's amazing how individuals rise to power in those moments of turmoil.
Napoleon's a fascinating character, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, brilliant military strategist, no question. But what's interesting is that while he was conquering, countries, he was also spreading those ideals of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity.
Huh.
It's kind of a paradox, almost like he was accidentally sowing the seeds for his own defeat.
Right. It makes you wonder, right? He's building an empire, but at the same time, he's spreading the very ideas that will ultimately challenge the idea of empires.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key concept from this period, nationalism.
Yeah.
You've highlighted a few sources that really dive deep into the rise of national identity, and its complicated consequences.
Nationalism, the double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
It can be this powerful force for unity, bringing people together based on a shared language, a shared culture, a shared history. But then it can also be used to justify conflict and exclusion. And we see both sides of that in this period.
Well, yeah.
On one hand, you have the unification of Italy and Germany,
Right.
where nationalist movements led to new nation states. But then on the other hand, there are tragic examples like those failed uprisings in Poland where their hope for independence was crushed by bigger, more powerful empires.
It's true.
So you've got revolutions changing political boundaries, but while all this is happening, another revolution is brewing. And this one is going to transform the world in a completely different way. The Industrial Revolution. It's almost hard to grasp how big of a change it really was.
Oh, yeah, a total turning point. And the sources you've picked out really capture what it was like. Just think, steam engines powering ships, powering factories, a ship from, handmade stuff to mass production, cities growing like crazy. We're talking muscle power to machine power, a world of craftspeople to a world of factories.
And it's not just the technology, is it?
No.
The Industrial Revolution created these whole new social classes, new ways of living, and new ways of thinking about everything. It's a totally new social and economic order.
It is. And what's really interesting is how connected it is to the Enlightenment. Remember all that emphasis on reason and progress and scientific thought?
Yeah.
Well, those ideas laid the groundwork for the innovations that made the Industrial Revolution possible. It's one big chain reaction.
Yeah.
One revolution setting up the next.
But like any revolution, there were consequences, right?
Of course.
Both good and bad. The sources you sent talk about some of the downsides of industrialization, things like the exploitation of workers, the rise of slums, the widening gap between the rich and poor.
Right. Those were some of the growing pains of industrialization, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And this is when we see new ideologies emerging, like socialism. People are trying to grapple with this new world order.
And that reminds me of Adam Smith versus Karl Marx, right?
Oh, yeah.
Two brilliant minds, but very different visions for how society should work.
Absolutely. Smith, we see him as the father of modern capitalism.
Right.
He believed that if everyone pursued their own self-interest in a free market, it would ultimately benefit, everybody. He called it the invisible hand of the market, this force that would regulate everything, leading to prosperity and progress.
But Marx saw things differently, right?
He did.
Yeah.
He saw capitalism as inherently exploitative, a system where the wealthy few profited off the labor of everyone else. He predicted the working class would rise up and, overthrow the whole capitalist system.
Wow.
Their ideas represent two fundamentally different views of how we should organize society. And even though both thinkers have been, critiqued and reinterpreted, that tension between those viewpoints is still shaping our political and economic debates today.
So we've got revolutions transforming politics. We've got industrialization changing societies and economies. And where does it all lead? Well, if we follow all these interconnected events, they lead us right to the era of empires that scramble for global domination.
Right.
It's a story of ambition, greed, and the pursuit of power. But I think that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive.
Oh, absolutely. That scramble for empires. It really is like the natural endpoint of all these forces we've been talking about. The Industrial Revolution, it created this like massive need for raw materials and new markets for all this stuff they were making.
Right.
And, well, European powers, they had their eyes on these huge territories just, ripe for the taking.
Yeah, armed with all their fancy new technology and, a healthy dose of thinking they were better than everyone else. It's like the world was suddenly up for grabs and they were ready to, claim their piece.
And claim they did. The sources you sent actually highlight some of the key tech advancements that made it all possible. Steamships, for faster travel, railroads to get into the interiors, the telegraph for instant communication, and of course, we can't forget the ever-evolving weaponry. It's like a recipe for really fast expansion and, unfortunately, domination.
It was like the world just shrunk overnight, right? Those far-off places suddenly seemed like within reach. But it wasn't just technology that drove this expansion, right? There was this like darker side to it, a way of justifying it all.
You're talking about social Darwinism, right?
Yeah.
That distorted interpretation of Darwin's theory, like they used it to justify European dominance. This whole idea that some races, some nations are just naturally superior, destined to rule over others.
It's just like a chilling thought, using science to justify exploitation and oppression. And the Berlin Conference, where they just sat down and divided up Africa amongst themselves, it's the perfect example of this mindset. They drew lines on a map, totally ignoring existing ethnic and cultural boundaries. It's like they were playing a game of whisk with entire continents.
It's a stark reminder of, the arrogance and the ruthlessness of that era. But I think to really understand imperialism, we need to go beyond these like big narratives and look at specific cases. You've chosen 3 really interesting ones, actually: India, China, and Japan.
Yeah. Each
one shows us the complexity of colonization and the effects that are still felt today.
Let's start with India, often called the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? A jewel obtained through force and exploitation.
India's story is like the textbook example of how these empires used their economic and military power to reshape entire societies to benefit themselves.
Right.
It wasn't just about taking resources. It was about changing like the fundamental fabric of life in India. And it often had really devastating consequences.
You pointed out some truly awful examples in these sources, like Britain intentionally crippled India's textile industry, which had been thriving for centuries. They, put these huge taxes on Indian-made cloth and flooded the market with cheap, mass-produced stuff from British factories.
It was a deliberate move to make India dependent on British goods, to turn them into like a captive market. The result was the destruction of traditional industries and, well, widespread poverty among Indian artisans and weavers.
And then there were the famines?
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking to read about how British policies forced Indian farmers to grow cash crops, things like indigo and cotton, instead of food. I mean, it left them incredibly vulnerable to drought and starvation.
Right.
And all for profit.
It's a tragic reminder of the real human cost of these empires. But, to be fair, British rule wasn't all bad.
Yeah.
They did, introduce things like railroads, telegraph lines, and they set up a modern education system, although it was mainly designed to, serve British interests.
I mean, those benefits were primarily meant to help them control the colony and extract resources, right? They needed efficient ways to transport goods and keep things in order. It wasn't like out of the goodness of their hearts, right? It was all about power and profit.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now, moving on to China, we see a different scenario playing out.
Okay.
China wasn't formally colonized by like a single European power.
Right.
It was more like this death by a thousand cuts, as you put it.
Yeah, exactly.
The Qing dynasty was already weakened by all these internal rebellions, making them vulnerable. And Western powers saw this as an opportunity.
They swooped right in.
They did. They used their military and economic power to force China to open up to trade, but on terms that favored them heavily.
And the Opium Wars, that's a prime example, right?
A prime example, Britain, they were determined to keep that opium trade going, even though it was literally destroying lives in China.
Yeah.
And they used their military to force unequal treaties.
It's really a dark chapter in history, marked by addiction and exploitation, the erosion of Chinese sovereignty. And it shows how industrialization shifted the balance of power so much. Western nations had this huge advantage in military technology.
It did. And now, to contrast both India and China, we have Japan, a nation that amazingly resisted Western domination and actually, charted its own course.
Japan's story is incredible. In just a few decades, they went from this feudal society ruled by the Tokugawa shogunate to this modern industrial power, able to compete with anyone. I mean, that's a massive transformation.
It is. And what's really interesting is that Japan's modernization was driven by fear. They saw what was happening in China and other places, and they decided, we're not going to let that happen to us.
So instead of giving in to Western pressure, they adapted. They took Western technology, Western ideas, but held on to their own cultural identity. It was this period of rapid industrialization, military buildup, and social reform. We know it as the Meiji Restoration.
And it worked. I mean, Japan became a major power, shocking the world by defeating Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. They proved that a non-Western nation could not just resist Western powers, but could actually become a major player on the world stage.
So we've seen the ripple effects of the Enlightenment. Revolutions that redrew the political map, industrialization that reshaped societies and economies, and ultimately the rise of these massive empires. It's this whole whirlwind of interconnected events that have shaped, the world we live in today.
And that's the point, isn't it? The events of this era, they're not just ancient history, they still influence everything. International relations, economics, social movements, even cultural identities.
It's a good reminder that the past is always with us, woven into the present. And by understanding these historical connections, we can better understand this complex world that we live in. But before we get too philosophical here, we still have one more leg of our journey. We've seen empires rise, but what about their fall? Well, that's where we'll pick up in part 3. So we've gone from the Enlightenment to the Industrial Revolution. We've seen these empires rise, but empires, well, they don't last forever. What led to their eventual decline?
It's rarely just one thing, that brings down an empire.
Right.
It's more like this combination of pressures, both from inside and out, that just kind of chip away at their foundations.
Okay.
It's like almost like a game of Jenga, pull out the wrong pieces and the whole thing collapses.
Oh, I like that analogy. And some of those pieces, like one of our sources mentions this rising nationalism within the colonies themselves. It's funny how those same ideas that fueled European empires, things like self-determination and national identity, ended up like backfiring on them.
Absolutely. As people in the colonies got more access to education, and as they saw, the hypocrisy of these empires talking about liberty but not giving it to them, nationalist movements really started gaining traction.
They wanted their own independence, their own self-rule.
Exactly.
And then World War I, that definitely didn't help, did it?
Oh, no.
It drained resources, showed everyone how vulnerable these empires were, and just fueled that fire of nationalism even more in their colonies. It's like the war shook the whole world up and created this opportunity for change.
Yeah, the war was a catalyst for sure. It weakened those European powers, both economically and politically, making them much more susceptible to challenges, both internally and from rivals.
And we can't forget the economic side of things either. Maintaining these huge empires was expensive, right? And as we move into the 20th century, it seems like those costs started outweighing the benefits for a lot of these European powers.
Right. And then the Great Depression that just piled on made it even harder for them to justify the cost of, holding on to these colonies. The sources you sent talk about how those economic problems, combined with that growing anti-colonial sentiment, well, it created this perfect storm for decolonization.
It's really interesting to see how all these things are connected,
Yeah.
The rise of nationalism, World War I, the changing economic landscape, they all contributed to the dismantling of empires. But it wasn't like a smooth and peaceful process, was it?
Not at all. Decolonization was long, it was often violent, marked by all these struggles for independence, civil wars, political instability. It was never going to be easy, going from colonial rule to self-government. And a lot of these newly independent nations had they had a tough time building stable and successful societies.
So what can we take away from all of this whole era of revolutions, empires, and their eventual decline? There's a lot to unpack here.
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that history isn't, a straight line. It's messy, full of contradictions, and a lot of times driven by things that nobody intended. We see that all throughout this period, from those Enlightenment ideas that fueled both revolutions and empires, to industrialization that brought both progress and exploitation.
It's a good reminder that even the most powerful empires, well, they're not invincible. They're built on shaky ground, vulnerable to all sorts of pressures. And the ideas that they spread, well, those ideas can be used against them too.
Yeah, and the sources you chose, they do a great job of showing all of this. But the exploration doesn't stop here, right? As you keep reading, keep thinking about how the legacies of this era still affect us today. How do things like nationalism, globalization, and inequality continue to shape our world? What can we learn from the past to build a better, fairer future? Just keep asking those questions, keep challenging what you think you know, and keep making those connections. That's what makes learning so cool.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive. From the spark of revolution to the fall of empires, we've covered a lot of ground. It's amazing how seemingly random events are actually all connected, shaping the world we live in today. Thanks for joining us.
And thanks for providing such thought-provoking sources. Remember, history isn't just dates and names. It's this ongoing story that shapes our present and our future. Keep exploring.